2019 marks the 76th anniversary of the repeal of Chinese Exclusion Act, the first and the only legislation in the US history that limited immigration based on race. However, the model minority label Chinese American is bearing today makes the past seem so unrelatable. In this short documentary, I'm joining history teacher Greig Roselli to the Museum of Chinese in America to explore the dramatic change of Chinese experience in this country. In 1849, the news circled the globe. There was gold in California. By 1851, 25,000 Chinese immigrants had left their homes and moved to the west coast. However, they soon found that the gold mountain was an illusion. Mining was uncertain work, and the gold fields were littered with disappointed prospectors and hostile locals. These immigrants started to turn to other occupations. In 1862, Congress authorized Union Pacific and Central Pacific to build a transcontinental railroad. Although Chinese immigrants were unwanted due to the general prejudices, Chinese laborers made up over 90% of the workforce. However, in this group photo taken at the opening ceremony, it is very hard not to notice what's missing.
Dignitaries did not invite Chinese workers to the official gold spike ceremony despite their significant contribution and death toll for the national project.
Everyone did not become railway laborers. Many chose laundry, which was seen as undesirable work by Euro-American. The 8-pound life was popular among Chinese not just because it required no special skill set or venture capital, but also it was seen as a gateway to independent business. As small groups competed for work, prejudice against Chinese immigrants intensified. In 1880, San Francisco required owners of 320 laundries in wooden buildings to obtain a permit. 2/3 of the laundries were owned by Chinese people, but none were granted a permit, whereas only one non-Chinese owner was denied. And this hostility eventually led to Chinese Exclusion Act. Unfair labor competition was a major pretext. In other words, compared with other minority groups such as the Irish, the Chinese were willing to do hard labor work with low pay.
Like this family of one of our curators, she had this photo and she wondered like, oh, why is it cropped out? What's missing? When her family came to America, they actually brought 2 additional boys with them, which are called paper sons, so they have forged documents.
The paper son phenomenon started from 1906. In that year, San Francisco earthquake caused a huge fire that destroyed public birth documents. Suddenly, a new opportunity for citizenship arose. Some Chinese Americans would report their wives had given birth to a son or a daughter eligible to be a US citizen. These documents could then be used for their actual sons or sold to friends, neighbors, and strangers. To combat the forged documents and truly enforce the Chinese Exclusion Act, an immigration station opened in Angel Island in 1910.
Ask me some questions. If I can't answer you, then I have to be deported.
What's your name?
Greg.
What's your, who are the people that you came to America with?
My mom and dad.
What's the name of the ship you were on?
The USS Fortuna.
What was the name of your home? What was the name of your address? Or what was your address in China?
Oh, they would ask those questions.
Yeah, how many?
Which of course, I might not be able to answer.
Mm-hmm. How many windows did you have in your house? How many steps was it from to your front door? How many rooms were in your house? How many steps was it to your neighbors?
If the answers could not be corroborated with witnesses' statements, immigrants might face prolonged question time or even deportation. The potential dire consequences made coaching books very popular.
Another identity.
So right here we have an example of a coaching book. If you're going to be interrogated in that way, you need to know the answer.
The Second World War has dramatically improved the Sino-US relationship. In 1943, Chinese Exclusion Act was abolished, but only 105 Chinese were allowed to be granted entry every year.
The difference between Chinese and Japs is measurable in millimeters.
In 1965, Immigration and Nationality Act was passed in response to civil rights movement and to encourage more high-tech talents to come to the US during the Cold War. The race-based quota system was scratched. Nevertheless, the improved treatment of Chinese Americans was overshadowed by the strained relationship between the US and the hostile Communist China.
You will remember that in preceding letters I tried to urge upon you the wisdom of taking cautiously the stories you were getting from your friends and relatives. My parents, they grew up, well, they came of age during in the 70s and so on. So like the Soviet Union, communism. So I can remember even by teachers being told that, China's bad, Soviet Union is bad.
Around the same period, exposure of Asian culture in showbiz have further improved the racial relations between Chinese and other Americans. The Brides of Fu Manchu is a 1966 crime film about the fictional Asian villain kidnapping the daughters of prominent scientists. However, the Asian antagonist Fu Manchu was played by Christopher Lee, a white actor. In the same year, Asian American was described for the first time as model minority by the New York Times, followed by a similar article about Chinese Americans published in the US News and World Report months later. In the 1980s, almost all major US magazines and newspapers printed success stories of Asian Americans. However, some challenged the model minority stereotype.
Oh look, Asian Americans are so successful. Black Americans aren't successful in the same way. Clearly, the problem is not that they're minorities. The problem is that African Americans are black.
Chinatown is changing. As the largest residential area affected by 9/11, traffic was prohibited for 8 days and businesses were effectively isolated by the loss of telephone service. As a result, 23% of residents were unemployed in the 3 months after the terrorist attack. The 2010 census found an 8.7% drop in Chinatown population since 2001. Many new Asian immigrants, especially Fujianese, chose to move to Chinatowns in other boroughs, such as Brooklyn's Sunset Park.
You put that thing down now.
Good food. You ever walked on 8th Avenue?
Throughout the history, Asian Americans have confronted a long legacy of inequality, particularly during the periods of changing demographics, economic recessions, or war. In spite of historic and linguistic differences, distinct Asian nationalities have been grouped together and treated similarly in the larger society. The pioneering Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Indians, and Filipinos each faced similar conditions of restriction, which forged the beginnings of a common shared Asian experience in America. But the question is, has exclusion been truly ended for every ethnicities and religions in this country for good?